What is going on, guys? It's Sean O'Connell, the managing editor here at CinemaBlend, back with another episode breakdown of WandaVision. We are through episode number 5, this one called A Very Special Episode. And it's kind of funny, it brought me right back to the junket interview I did with Elizabeth Olsen, where I kind of caught her off guard because we were talking about sitcom genres and the tropes that come with sitcoms, and I said, do we get tonight on a very special episode of WandaVision?
Do we get to what?
Because like in the 80s they'd be like, tonight on a very special episode of WandaVision.
Might.
Now that I know that she knew what was coming, it's kind of mind-blowing. So let's talk about all of the things that we learned in this week's episode of WandaVision and what it means for not just this show, but the MCU moving forward. Naturally, in order to do that, we are going to have to dive into all sorts of spoilers. So if you haven't seen WandaVision up through episode 5, please back out of this video right now because we're going to get incredibly spoilery right off of the top. So we're going to kick off with Quicksilver and the Multiverse, which happens at the very end of the episode, and it's something that, you know, I think some fans were anticipating, but maybe they thought it was going to be Aaron Taylor Johnson. With all these references of Pietro, we thought we might get to see Quicksilver come back, and especially in an episode that is so wholly dedicated to the theme of death and loss. And Wanda doesn't necessarily have the power, or does she, to reverse death. After the family dog, Sparky, who we just met, dies by eating specific leaves from Agnes's bushes, the twins, who are now grown up, essentially ask Wanda to fix dead. Like, you can fix anything, Mom. Please fix dead. And that's the heart of what's going on in WandaVision. Wanda's trying to fix dead by bringing Vision back, by lamenting the loss of Pietro. But I want to get into Quicksilver showing up at the doorstep of the home and what it means for what's going on here. So there's been a lot of speculation about the fact that WandaVision is going to be the way that Marvel introduces the concept of the multiverse. And the multiverse meaning that there are other worlds running concurrent to the one that we're living in. It's a prevalent concept in the comic books. Both Marvel and DC have both played around with the multiverse. So it gives you the chance to do alternate versions of familiar characters. The CW DC shows did a whole big crossover for their multiverse where they brought different characters from different worlds into different places. Marvel hasn't done it yet, but they're about to ramp up to doing it in a big way. And so bringing Evan Peters and his version of Quicksilver over to the Marvel Cinematic Universe is confusing, and it is going to lead to, or need to lead to, more explanation that I assume is going to be coming in episodes 6 through 9 as the show continues. Because what it essentially means is the Marvel stories that were being told over by 20th Century Fox, all of the X-Men films, where these versions of these characters existed in Marvel stories but were not able to interact with the full-on MCU, similar to Spider-Man over at Sony, are now under the umbrella of Disney and Marvel because Disney bought Fox. So, you know, we're always speculating like, okay, well, how is Kevin Feige, how are the masters at Marvel going to figure out a way to bring mutants into the MCU? And we just got our first look at how they're planning on doing it, at least potentially, by plucking one of the mutants from the Fox X-Men movies and bringing him over to the MCU and dropping him into WandaVision. This is Quicksilver. This is essentially the same character that we saw in Avengers Age of Ultron, but one who existed in a different world. And in the X-Men world, though we met Quicksilver in X-Men Days of Future Past, and then he was significant to Apocalypse and one other X-Men. Dark Phoenix. God, trying to forget that movie even existed. He did not interact with a Wanda, a Scarlet Witch, on the X-Men side. But when we met Quicksilver in the Avengers universe in Age of Ultron, he was paired with his sister Wanda right from the very beginning. So there's a lot of explaining that has to happen, but this is essentially Marvel peeling back the curtain, kicking open the door, so to say, to the concept of the multiverse, to saying that those other characters that existed in the other properties are now open to us. We can pull them in if we want to. Does this mean theoretically that, like, Hugh Jackman's Wolverine could show up? Yes. I mean, honestly, yes, that's what it means. And it means that Patrick Stewart's Charles Xavier could show up if he wanted to, or James McAvoy's Charles Xavier could show up. Like, by bringing over Evan Peters as Quicksilver, you're telling me that all those characters that were on the table over at Fox are now open to the game. Now, does that mean that Marvel needs to do that? No, they don't have to at all. They can pick and choose who they bring. They don't have to bring anybody else if they don't want to. But that is on the table. And then when you step back even further, it a little bit starts to make sense, the rumors that you hear about things that are going on with Spider-Man 3. Because there's been speculation that WandaVision is going to feed into Spider-Man 3, which is going to feed into Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, that all three of those would be a big sort of multiverse arc. So go to Spider-Man 3 for a second. You've been hearing casting rumors, though nothing confirmed, that Alfred Molina is going to be back and playing Dr. Octopus from the Sam Raimi films. That Jamie Foxx is back and playing Electro from the Andrew Garfield, Mark Webb Spider-Man films. It's essentially the same thing. Like, here's Evan Peters getting plucked out of the Bryan Singer X-Men universe and dropped into the MCU, probably in a similar way that Marvel is about to start plucking Dr. Octopus out of the Sam Raimi films, Electro out of the Mark Webb films, and they're just part of the MCU now. And it all comes from Marvel, on the business side, behind the scenes, working out deals with the different studios to get the rights to their characters back, and then figuring out a story that makes sense in order to bring them all into the MCU. And it involves the multiverse, and it involves Wanda, who is one of the most powerful characters. See, I wanted to say mutant because Wanda is a mutant. She's supposed to be at heart a mutant. In the Marvel comics, she's a mutant. In the MCU, she gets her powers through the Mind Stone, and maybe this starts to hint at the fact that the Mind Stone is going to be somewhat responsible for unlocking the mutant gene inside people. Like, now you have two mutants, and Quicksilver is a flat-out mutant, although Aaron Taylor Johnson's version was also granted his powers through the Mind Stone. But now you have Evan Peters, who was a legit mutant in the Fox universe. It opens the doors to so many discussions, and we're just scratching the surface here, but it means that the multiverse is now a concept. So let's shift over to Wanda and a sort of philosophical question about whether she is the threat at hand here, or whether what Wanda is doing for good. We get confirmation that all of this is because of Wanda's grief. That Wanda is devastated by the loss of Vision, and when Monica Rambeau is discussing how it felt being inside of the simulation, she says it felt like you were drowning, like you were hopeless, right? Like, this is Wanda just lost in the emotion of grief. And this is Marvel taking a big swing at addressing how a character, how an individual handles grief, handles loss, but how it would happen in a superhero story, which again is just next level sort of mature dramatic storytelling. And I cannot applaud Marvel enough for tackling it this way. It's not nearly as simple as saying, like, is Wanda being selfish by creating this alternate universe where she and Vision can live happily ever after, quote unquote, because it's having an effect on all the people who are in the simulation. Like, there's an amazing scene where Vision is starting to figure out what's going on, thanks to some help from the people on the outside, where he gets an email from S.W.O.R.D that essentially says, like, hey, everyone's being manipulated. And it's been amazing to see. I'm going to applaud Paul Bettany here for the way that he has to play Vision as both the construct of, I'm in Wanda's imaginary world, and I'm happy, and I'm the husband and the father, and playing along with everything. But I love it even more when he's able to pull back and question everything that's happening around them and saying, like, this isn't right, Wanda. And Wanda has control over him. We've seen times when she has, like, reversed the show or allowed them to start over. But Vision is tearing through the construct little by little. And the way that Paul Bettany plays it is amazing. When Vision talks to Norm and learns that Norm, as a real person, his life is being affected in a really dramatic way. There are things going on in his world. He has a family member who's sick, who he can't get in touch with. He says that Wanda is essentially in his head. Vision knows. I loved the visual of the end credits rolling in Wanda's sitcom world, and Vision saying, no, we're not done here yet. You know, like, don't tell us we're going to bed and we're going to wake up the next day and everything's fine. It's fantastic. It's fantastic the way that, like, WandaVision has set up the construct of the sitcom episode, and now we have a character inside the sitcom who's saying to the architect of it all, no, get rid of this all. Because it was, like, the show, this episode did sort of lean back heavily into the sitcom construct, and it had an amazing theme song straight out of the Family Ties type era, or the Full House type era. We went through in the 80s this really schmaltzy version of primetime sitcoms, where you would get a very special episode of a particular show. And for Family Times specifically, it was when Tom Hanks guest starred as Uncle Ned, who was an alcoholic, who, was disrupting the family, even though he was like the party guy, the happy uncle. But he had some real serious problems. And it was unusual at the time to see a half-hour sitcom tackle really dramatic emotional issues like that. Like, oh, here's the Family Ties family who's normally we're used to, their jokes and everything's resolved by the end of the episode. But here's a character who they're introducing who's truly struggling, and you got somebody like Tom Hanks who could act the hell out of that. And that's when you got the very special episode of Fill in the Blank. And that was, it was amazing to see how well WandaVision took that trope, but worked it into the structure of the show where it still fit at this time, where everything that Wanda has kind of been building around her is starting to come down because the people on the inside are questioning it. The New Jersey residents who she's manipulating to be players in the show, but also Vision himself. Because there's that amazing scene, like, we can't stress enough how impressive it is to see how often Elizabeth Olsen, who is brilliant in this role, shifts the tone of the show 3 to 4 times without missing a single beat. Like, her performance is off the charts amazing. If you just think of how she has to play the character in the episode, the character when she's trying to convince Vision that everything's okay. We got that amazing scene where she steps outside of the Hex, Darcy, I'm using your verbiage.
You called it the Hex. And
confronts the soldiers. They're all played with different shades by Elizabeth Olsen over the course of a 30-minute episode, not even a 30-minute episode. And it breaks your heart. Like, I've heard from a couple of friends already who have talked about the final scene, the confrontation between Wanda and Vision, where she's trying to explain to him, like, I'm doing this for us, and he's trying to say that, like, you don't have the ability to make that decision, like, you can't play God with all these other people. But to me, it was the scene when she walked outside of the Hex and sort of laid out for the soldiers that were out there, like, you're not going to get in here because I have Vision back, and no one's going to take him from me again. Like, that's when you got to see, that was almost as powerful as Wanda staring down Thanos and saying, you took everything from me. And when he says, I don't even know who you are, and she's like, you will. That was the beginning of us understanding how much she hurt, from losing Vision. This has been a multi-episode build-up to us understanding how much this grief is weighing on her. And the show confirms that she did break in and steal Vision's corpse, and that goes against not only the Sokovia Accords, but also, an interesting note, goes against Vision's living will, that he not be used as a weapon by anybody. That includes Wanda. So Wanda is so blinded and so overwhelmed by her grief at the loss of Vision that she's doing whatever she can. So you could make an argument for either side of saying Wanda is wrong for doing this. Wanda is the threat. You can almost understand why S.W.O.R.D views her that way, because she's very powerful, and if she were to snap, it would be big problems for everybody involved. However, you could very easily step onto the other side and make the compelling argument that she's emotionally devastated, and almost like, why not let her create this alternate universe where she can live happily ever after with Vision and a family? The twins are going to be a problem. Mark my words right now. There was a lot of conversation about what's real and isn't real inside the simulation, and Monica saying that, like, no, the things that Wanda creates are real. And Wanda is putting an imprint on the twins. Like, she is emotionally bonding with the twins over the course of this, and if we get to a point where Wanda figures out that the twins that she gave birth to are not real, and she doesn't have these children, and she's lost the family, all hell is going to break loose in a House of M type of way. And Wanda has the power to completely wipe the slate clean. And so I'll be really curious to see what's going on. It's so funny to see us on an episode by episode basis try to figure out exactly what's going on and what it could mean, when it's very clear that Kevin Feige and Marvel have planned the next 5 to 10 years. And we are so in the dark about the amazing things that they have coming. So let's get to Captain Marvel and the Aerospace engineer. This is when you get to pay attention to the little asides that happen in the episodes and start to figure out what it could mean for stuff moving forward. You had to pay attention to Monica Rambeau's reaction when they were hinting at the fact that Captain Marvel almost succeeded over Thanos. Those two have some history. She did not want to talk about Captain Marvel in the least bit, and I found that to be pretty fascinating because last we saw Carol Danvers and Monica Rambeau interacting was when Carol was taking off into outer space. And Monica was still a very young girl in the 1990s in Captain Marvel. We do know that Monica has a long history with S.W.O.R.D, and that her and her mom, Maria, helped to establish S.W.O.R.D, and that Monica was involved in several escapades in space, where she talked about in episode 4, now at this point, that there were, allies and threats in outer space. She dropped that. So she's clearly aware of what's going on up there, has been up there, and been part of it before the snap. But when you mentioned Captain Marvel to Monica Rambeau, she did not want any part of that. Like that facial reaction said a lot, and I'm super curious what it means. Also, who was Monica texting? She was planning, she seemed to be coming up with a scheme or a concoction where they would put a large shelter over Westview. And once that shelter was put into place, she'd be able to go back inside of Wanda's simulation and try to take it down or get to Wanda. But she wanted to protect everything from happening over the course of it. And she said, I know an aerospace engineer who might be able to help with this. I don't know who that is, but I would like to know who that is. And that is a very blatant reference to someone, I'm sure. And so let the speculation begin. Hit the comments down below and let me know who you think the aerospace engineer that Monica Rambeau knows. And again, this is just Marvel's playing chess. Like, they're so far ahead of where we need to be. I would love to know who Monica Rambeau was trying to text before that got away. So this episode had everything that you would want from a Marvel show. Like, Phase 4 is just off to a beginning start. And once these things start to play out and unravel in WandaVision, you can begin to look ahead to talk about all the different places where they could affect the next announced shows. And it's crazy exciting if you're a Marvel fan. Like, there's so much to come. This show it's so much better than I thought it was going to be. I figured it was going to be a pretty entertaining, bottle WandaVision episode kind of thing, or show, self-contained story, when in fact it feels like it's laying the groundwork for about 10 different stories that can spill out of it and take the MCU into places we never even dreamed possible. That's my take on all the stuff that happened. Now I want to hear from you guys. Make sure you hit the comments below. Let me know your thoughts on episode 5 of WandaVision, where you think we're going with 6 and 7. The idea that Evan Peters is here playing Quicksilver. The idea that Vision is seeing through Wanda's construct. Who is the aerospace engineer? Start to answer some of my questions. I'm answering your questions. Answer my questions. And make sure that you're back here next week on CinemaBlend, where we can continue to break down all of the cool things that we're learning from Disney Plus and Marvel Studios and their brand new show, WandaVision.